But I think in future, the way that we're moving, it will be something where students hopefully don't feel in 50 years' time, and schools will be able to create a system where there is not a disconnect between a teacher and a student.
Hello and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. Today is the second and final episode delving into student wellbeing. We are again joined on the program by teacher Michael Pegiou from Oakley Grammar School in Melbourne. Oakley Grammar caters for kindergarten to year 12 students and has been operating since 1984. As a year coordinator, Michael experiences the topic of wellbeing on a daily basis, both with staff and students, and is here today to share his perspective. Hello, Michael, and welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
Have you found that social media has been a bit of a problem?
It is always going to be something that comes up. I've had problems this year with social media. Bullying on social media, unfortunately, doesn't go away. For some students, it is a constant challenge if they are going to be targeted, especially by students that are not necessarily in our school. If that happens, there's obviously ways in which we can deal with it, but it's just a challenging area. I have been fortunate; it hasn't happened too much this year for myself. I know it does happen in some other year levels, though, a little bit more. But in terms of how we deal with it, I think the main thing is that we ensure that students are not on their phones on site. We restrict their digital use while on site to only being in classroom. If we catch a phone on them, we confiscate it if it's without permission, or if it's not in their locker during the appropriate times. Same thing with the iPads. And I guess that's the easiest way to kind of deal with it on site. You just make sure that it doesn't impede their social circles through, Snapchat or TikTok or anything like that. I'm very out of date with these things now. I'm pretty much, that's the way we deal with it off-site. When it comes to on-site, when it comes to off-site, most of the time it will become an issue when a parent raises it. And when the parent raises it, they typically will send in what's going on. They usually are very quick to do that if anything happens online. But that's when we start to liaise with the parents of both sides. We start to figure out strategies to ensure that students not only deal with it in the right way, where they don't start then lashing out again and it becomes a bigger thing, but more so where we get the student that did, let's say, post something or say something, we give them the opportunity to have a chat with us, to talk us through the reasons as to why. We then go into a bit of a mediation. Well, we go into what the consequences may be, but then how we rectify it through more so mediation, where we get them to talk to the other student and see if we can come to a resolution that will allow both those parties to feel like they can preserve the relationship that they once had, or at least to come out of it where both of them understand where each other are at. One, the party that has posted something can apologize and may be able to retract what they've done through other efforts as well. And so you don't want to look at punishing students, for instance, in those instances and just leaving it there. It's best that you try and fix the relationship that those students once had, or at least have it become amicable, so both of them can come out of it where they'll shake hands, they'll part ways, and there won't be any issues moving forward. I think that's the biggest thing. You want to make sure that the relationships between those that do post online negatively and those that are affected by it, you want to make sure that you can strengthen those after that instance, to alleviate any stress that student that was targeted will have about further repercussions.
Are exams something that bring on stress for students?
Most definitely. They bring on stress for teachers too, with the amount of marking we have to do. A student will have to do 6 exams and then a teacher will have to mark 600, maybe not that much. But you know what I'm trying to say. Yep. But, when it comes to student stress over exams, it is an area that they find particularly challenging. I will say that COVID definitely changed up the way that schools, my school, for instance, and I know from other schools as well, did roll out exams. I know that a lot of the younger year levels no longer did exams because they found that, again, to reduce that stress, that anxiety that students had, it's best not to throw a test in front of them after spending so much time online and potentially unable to remember the content that they've done. But for the older kids that did go into exams, it was stressful. And that's where, again, I think it just is one of the things that the teacher has to try and mitigate by providing them with the right advice, by giving them the right kind of coaching to go into an exam with the mindset of, and I always tell my students, it's not the grade. and I understand that is a difficult thing for some of them to get, and is something that especially for those that are really academically driven, they find a concept that they don't particularly like. But for me, it is the effort. As long as my students try, as long as they give it their best shot, or whatever their best is at that time, the outcome doesn't matter. It's the process that they deal with it. So instead of thinking outcome driven, and that's generally what gives us a lot of stress. It's actually not the process itself. It's the stress of, well, what will I get at the end of it? If you can focus on teaching students how to have better processes in place, don't look at the outcome. Focus on the process. Focus on the way in which you deal with something over a longer time period, or even if it's over a short term. Focus on the day-to-day. What are the things you're going to put in place to become prepared? They have the right habits in place, then they will probably get to the exam with a lot less stress in mind, because they will be set up to deal with it by that point. And that's my way around it. I won't look at, well, you need to do this and this for an A. I'll say, well, you should do this each night to help you. You can do this, for instance, you should study in short increments if you struggle to do it over a long period, and it's better anyways. Try half an hour. If you can't do half an hour, try 10 minutes. If you're feeling good after that 10 minutes, maybe stretch it out a bit more, but then give yourself a break and then go back to it. And make it manageable for your students that do have a real challenge with study or with academic excellence. Give them small habits to improve on, and that they can build on over time. And they'll find that the anxiety will go away, because they'll continue improving on those habits. By the time the exam comes around, they're not going to have these barriers in place where they're thinking of the outcome, because the outcome will be, no matter what, it will probably be better than they thought it would, because their process is a lot better.
What's more important, mental or physical health?
I think that they both are just as important, and when it comes down to it, each of them feed into the other. If you're not feeling at your best mentally, odds are you're also not at your best physically, and vice versa. I think that if you're not feeling your best physically, it impacts your mental health state. And I think when it comes down to it, to work on both of them while challenging, for initially, if you think about it, it doesn't have to be. And I think one thing I always tell my students, especially those that have those exam stresses, I say, well, do you go out for a walk? Do you invest in some time into actually exercising when you're studying? And a lot of them will say no. And I'll say, well, there are, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not going to go into all the benefits. I haven't read the literature at the moment. I know of it, but I haven't got the facts and figures. But, we know that if you take that time away from a screen or from a book and you go out for a walk, even just for 20 minutes, we know that what it does for you in terms of we know that what it will do for you is it will give you a greater sense of energy when you go back to that study. It will give you a reward. That feeling of reward, that dopamine.
Dopamine, yeah,
that's it. It's that reward that you get for achieving something physical, then will feed into the mental. And I think that's one of the big things is, even if it's not for study, even if it's for other issues, social issues, taking that time to look after the physical, because I think that's the easier area to focus on. It's a lot easier to motivate yourself to just go and do something physical, like a walk, or, if you have pets, even easier. If you have a dog, you take that for a walk, or you go with a family member. It's a lot easier to do that than it is to sit down and to focus on the mental aspects. It could be meditation. It could be that you journal. It could be that you have to actually, work on a skill to improve your mental capacity. If you go for that walk, easier to do, will then get you having a greater sense of accomplishment that feeds into whatever other area. Plus, it's also beneficial, vitamin D, getting out in the sun. That's something that a lot of our students, and all of us actually, probably after all this time in lockdown, hopefully have come to appreciate some time outdoors, where we get the opportunity, have that break away from the screen. And I think looking after the physical will then feed into the mental, and then that will also improve the way you look after both. Both of them work together really well. I don't think you can isolate either. I think that you need a real marriage between the two. And in doing so, you will holistically improve.
You're listening to Wellbeing, where we are discussing wellbeing of students. My guest today is teacher and year coordinator Michael Pegiou from Oakley Grammar School in Melbourne. All right, now we have the $1 million question for you, Michael. What's more important, academic performance or well-being?
Academic performance is very important if that's what the student wants. And that's where I'll say well-being trumps it, because not everyone wants to perform academically. There are a lot of students that don't really, that school maybe is not for. We know that a lot of the time school is more so catered to the middle band, and leaves a lot of students that are more into their technical skills out. It doesn't cater to them, or it may not, for instance, at some schools. And we know that for the real high achievers as well, maybe just being on off-site and on a computer may have been even more beneficial because there's no distractions. So I would actually say that when it comes to academic excellence, though, I think that it is important for those that want to go into specific fields. It's incredibly important to ensure that we provide them with opportunities to excel. With these students that are looking at going into being a lawyer, being a doctor, maybe even a further educating themselves. But when it comes to those that want to work with people as a carer, for instance, or want to go into a trade or go into creating their own business, I think well-being is what trumps, because that is an area where you focus on real life skills such as resilience, grit, empathy, a greater understanding of how to function as a citizen within our society and contribute in a positive manner. I think that is what will be impacted a lot more if you focus on well-being. You can be the smartest person in the room, but it doesn't mean that you can understand those around you and be there for them when you need to be, and work to create a greater sense of community. Whereas you could be that person if you understand, if you were looked after and cared for, then you're going to look after and care for those around you. And I think that's what we need in our communities now more than ever. We need a greater sense of empathy and understanding. We need to be there for each other and to support each other, because we are going through some rough times and we are going through some unprecedented challenges. So if that answers the question, Jack,
Absolutely.
I think that's the way that I'd like to frame it, is that I don't want to at all take it away that academic excellence isn't important. Of course it is, if that's where you're aiming to go in life and that's something you're aiming for. But I think that when it comes down to it, well-being is definitely going to lead to a greater impact over time, for all individuals, not for those that specifically may want to go somewhere.
When it comes to well-being, how do the parents of a student and the school interact?
So when it comes to well-being, the parents of a school will be notified through calls, emails as to how their student's going when it comes to these check-ins that we do. It may be the case that, I know that, for instance, in lockdown, we tried to call as many parents as we could just to see how their students were going, how they were faring online, to kind of get a sense of what we could do better, as well as just to make sure we do that checking in and have that due diligence in relation to their ensuring well-being is being catered for these students. Parents can be involved at our school, for instance, through the parent association. They can be involved through different events as well that we run. And I think the big thing for me as a coordinator is I try and open up a line of communication with a lot of parents, and try and make sure that if there are ever things that they would like to bring to my attention, they should feel free to, because I'm always open to listening and to improving the way in which I deal with not only student issues, but maybe like issues within the school in general, how I can try and impart my own advice on dealing with certain problems, or, alleviate stress in relation to other areas that they may have concerns over.
When it comes to young adults during their schooling years, what does a teacher need to do or a school need to provide so that they're set up for life?
One of the biggest things that I've come to terms with is that a lot of the time, as much as I love the content I teach, the kids will not remember it. You can talk about the Battle of the Somme for World War I, or you can talk about, for instance, going into the Industrial Revolution and the significance it had. But realistically, these kids are, they're not going to remember this in 2 years, let alone as adults. And so hopefully they remember it longer. Hopefully I have that impact. But if they don't, I think the big thing is I now really do look at, well, what skills can I try and enforce through my teaching? What And we teach the middle years program, so we have the IB embedded into our school, but we also focus on things like the learner profile attributes. So what attributes can I build in my students through my teaching? How can I make them more reflective? How can I make them more principled individuals? That's where I can open up discussions, especially in history, but also in things like geography, when we look at things like food scarcity, when we look at things like population booms and the problems that they create for cities. What kind of conversations can I create in my class that get students really thinking about how we deal with these large concepts? How do we, where there aren't actually solutions to them, that we have to really think through them, get them looking at things from multiple sides. I think that's really important to get them thinking critically. And apart from these attributes, at my school, we have different attributes that we try and instill within our students, and values. I think that's the word you use, which is really important. How do I embed values in my teaching? How can I draw out empathy from my students? How can I create a greater sense of community? How can I create a greater sense of gratitude? Through our pastoral program, we look at how we create a growth mindset within our students through getting them to go into character strengths. And so looking at their own unique individual strengths, how they can improve them, who their role models are, and realistically setting them up for how they all have their own unique gifts and what they should do to facilitate greater growth in those areas. But not only that, but to take on risks, to try and do new things. You create learning experiences for students where you put them out of their comfort zone. And I think that's the best way to make someone learn, put them out of their comfort zone. And when you put someone out of their comfort zone, they establish all kinds of new ways of thinking and ways of feeling that are unfamiliar, that then sits and stays with them. So the next time that happens, they're going to go back to that and then think of how they dealt with it in the previous time. And so you really, as a teacher, I think, are able to, depending on your subject, but I think in all subjects, you're able to draw out so many different tools that will create this uncomfortable feeling within your students to get them to grow in whatever way you want them to. I think that's the thing, is teachers fall back on their skills and their tools to kind of draw out new understandings from students, but not only new understandings, get them to draw out new perspectives on their own self, I think. So you don't want them just looking at a history, textbook and looking at a point in time in history and thinking, oh, I can see this differently now. You want them also then after that to reflect and think, I wouldn't have done that beforehand, and now I know how to. Or I can actually consider multiple sides of an argument now and kind of take my emotion out of it, look at it from a logical point of view. Or maybe the opposite way of thinking, I actually need to start taking emotion into account because I never used to think that way. I never realized the pain that these individuals in time would have once felt, and you can really drive that emotion from students through your teaching.
How do schools foster good self-esteem in students?
I think schools can work on self-esteem through a couple of different ways. Again, we can focus on friendships, like we were talking about before. We can focus on building habits, developing a growth mindset, getting them to partake in daily activities. Like, for instance, at our school, we used to do journaling in the morning. Or like even just a check-in, they would write down each morning out of 5 how they're going, and there were other small little prompts that they would be given at the start of each day to get them motivated. I think that when it comes down to it, there are a range of different ways that schools can deal with this, and we continue to look at ways that we can expand on it as well. That's kind of what I'd say to that area.
How prevalent are body image issues amongst young people?
For the most part, I think they are similar to what they always have been, but you now have also the influence of the internet that has been around for a while now, but continues to be an area that is a challenge. Body issues when it comes to the body are prevalent, particularly around the ages I deal with as well, your 8s, your 9s, your 10s. It still extends further. And when it comes to body image issues, I think the way that you, again, address this is through creating opportunities where students do realize that differences are great and that diversity is important. And there is no one way that we need to be or should be. And by enforcing that through not only conversation, but through giving them different experiences and through having students, especially we do split sessions at my school. So having students, that will be in these split sessions where we've got, for instance, the male students, female students separated for these sessions with their pastoral teachers. They'll go into topics that are more so catered toward them. This will give them opportunities to kind of flesh out what those particular groups find to be a real challenge, and you get to kind of have that conversation with them where you provide that mentorship and talking them through the fact that there is no one size fits all in any regard when it comes to the body. It is, I like to always look at it as it's function over everything else. As long as you're feeling good, you're able to use it well enough. As long as you are, comfortable and you're confident that you can go day to day without any, especially for me, any pains or aches, then you're fine. There's no problem there. As maintain a good frame of mind then, because I think that's the key thing, is you want to give them, again, that sense of understanding that they should be grateful for their body in whatever shape or size. And as long as they're happy and they're healthy, then that's the most important thing.
You're listening to Wellbeing, where we are discussing wellbeing of students. My guest today is teacher and year coordinator Michael Pegiou from Oakley Grammar School in Melbourne. Do you have a memory from your schooling career that has stayed with you?
When it comes to a particular instance that has had a significant impact on even me today, I'd have to say that there wasn't one particular subject or class. It was more so the type of teachers that I had. And I can still remember I had a teacher, Mr. O, in math. He, along with my history teacher, my English teacher, this was in my senior year, I had a lack of confidence with how I was going and really felt down with how I was. Again, I strove for academic excellence. I had a very competitive cohort, and he, like my history teacher and my English teacher, were really helpful through their comments and through the time they gave me one-on-one in building a sense of belief in myself. And I won't forget that I remember getting a bad score on a test one day. And again, it might seem silly, but, for me, it was something that was important at the time. He took me aside and he showed me how I'd been going that year. Went through a couple of the different points of data, and he said, "You're doing really well." And I kind of just looked down and I go, "No, I'm not. I'm not doing well at all." And I was really down, I'm not going to do well this year. And he kind of just took me aside at the end of the class as well, and he told me that he doesn't care about how I go. He cares about how I'm feeling. And he talked about the fact that unless I can take the time to really be proud of myself, then no matter what score I got, it would never be enough. And so he really did change my perception of self. He gave me a greater sense of I guess, self-worth. He made it about more than just a number. And that's what I try and take into my teaching now. That's what I always try and emphasize with my year 12s now. And I was so fortunate. I had a wonderful email, and I printed it out. I put it on my wall, sent to me from one of my students in year 12 when I got them to reflect on this year and, on what they'd taken from my class that goes beyond the academic, if there was anything. And one of the things that she said is that through and I'm reading from it now because I've got it in front of me, this is the benefit of being on Zoom, I guess. She just said that through my classes, she was taught that she shouldn't compare herself to everyone else dependent on marks or whether or not she knew the answer. But instead, gain the confidence to speak out and seek assistance rather than being embarrassed. She said that I taught her failure can be a good thing, that her failures in her work and mistakes taught her to reach for the stars and to reach for her greatest goals. and that this year she believes she's grown to be a better person thanks to her teachers, me just being one of them as well, and to grow into a person that she's become today. So I can definitely thank my own teachers, particularly that math teacher, but also my history and my English teacher, for giving me that mind frame early on, and for that being one of the main reasons that I am now a teacher, being that I can impart that mentorship to my students. And again, that goes back to my point on, well-being as opposed to academic excellence.
Where do you see student well-being going in the future in, say, 50 years?
That's a hard question. 50 years ahead, I think it will still be an area that we look at with, in a sense, ambiguity in some points, because it's so hard to pinpoint things sometimes, to be able to think, oh, what's the root cause of all these issues? Because most of the time it's very complex, and there's a lot of things that feed into why students aren't feeling their best, and there's a lot of issues that stem in areas that we can't address. But I think in future, the way that we're moving, it will be something where students hopefully don't feel in 50 years' time, and schools will be able to create a system where there is not a disconnect between a teacher and a student. It is not just, I am there at the front of the class and you are there in a seat. It is that, and staring and listening to me. It is going to be a space where we have young people that work with us to grow themselves, and we facilitate that growth through a institution that has a greater understanding. So without the institution being, education in general, actually, that has a greater understanding that we are there to develop, people, not a child that is paying fees. So, or just someone that has been sent to us. We're there to help build our community. And I think that's the way I really hope schools go. I hope schools continue to work together, not only independently, but across schools. We start looking at students' growth, not just as one single school, but as a range of schools coming together and working together to develop connections with each other and to develop greater and larger communities.
Well, it was a pleasure talking with you again, Michael.
Thank you, Jack. It has been a pleasure being on with you again as well.
My guest today was Year Coordinator and Teacher Michael Pegiou from Oakley Grammar School in Melbourne. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.